Collaboration is one of the most important competencies that any business, large or small, today can begin mastering. Throughout my career, which has been some 25 plus years now, I think most of the emphasis has been on strategy and innovation, and collaboration is now really coming into frame as connected to both of those very important thrusts in corporate life. But what's interesting about collaboration is that we tend to put it in a big bucket. We tend to think that it's sort of its own thing. And indeed it is, but we don't look at its parts. We don't look at its components. And this is part of where we fall short. It's easier for us to recognize collaboration when it's not happening than to actually focus and intentionally create it. So if I were to say to you, tomorrow I want you to go and take 4 steps to begin creating a more collaborative environment in your workplace, would you know where to begin? It would be hard, because we really don't think of collaboration as sort of having a starting point. This is among the reasons why I wrote Midnight Lunch. I began researching Thomas Edison's life and work 10 years ago, and have focused on delving into Edison's success and identifying how he became such a successful businessman, not just a successful scientist. Edison is the father of what we know today as research and development. The Menlo Park Laboratory, which we learned about in grade school, yes? There's an important fact that I know my social studies teacher failed to mention. And that is that Edison not only designed and constructed the Menlo Park Laboratory, but he created a method and a process through which we could go from idea all the way out to commercial success in virtually any industry, whether it was a product-based endeavor or service-based. For that alone, Edison would have gone down in history. Just to create this space, a space of collaboration where research and application could happen under the same roof. If we look at Edison's collaboration process, I think what we find is the on-ramp for innovation. If Edison's employees and his workers were not collaborative, he would not have had the extraordinary success that he did. And there are a couple reasons that I say this. We think of Edison as being a genius, someone who had ideas enough in a day to fill what we might generate in a month. Edison's very first invention, which he patented at the age of 22, was technologically a success, but a commercial failure. And the reason for that is that Edison did not speak to the audience for his invention. He did not think about the context in which the invention would be used. His first invention was the electronic vote recorder, which he created for the Massachusetts legislature. So this machine allowed legislators to put in their name, the number of the bill, and a yes, no. All this information would go down to the speaker and the vote would be registered. Now what's interesting is that there was no issue of vote fraud, there was no issue of delays in voting, no dangling chats in 1869. But what Edison was focusing on was efficiency in the process of pushing the button, a process that could take a matter of seconds. But the actual needs of the legislators were not around that part of the process. What he learned later was that the legislators, in terms of voting, had started their process weeks earlier, even months earlier, through the conversations, through the dialogue, through the backroom discussions, through the posturing. I'll vote for your bill if you will vote for mine. Yes? So none of that was captured in the actual transaction of voting. So what we see is the need that Edison realized to actually step back from just the idea and actually share his thinking earlier on in the process. And that required collaboration. As a teenager, Edison designed and built inventions using prototypers and small laboratory spaces in all of the cities in which he lived: Cincinnati, Louisville, Boston, New York, and others. So he was collaborative in his way of approaching actually constructing an invention, but not looking at markets. So sometimes this is where we also fall short. We think of collaboration as only going so far and then stopping. One of the interesting facts about Edison's view of collaboration, and I'm going to share the definition with you in a moment, is that he looked at it as a continuous process. It was not a stop-start process. We often confuse teamwork with collaboration. Teamwork is actually a process of, if you will, joining hands and walking together, kind of doing your part, contributing what you can, and then you're done. In collaboration, actually, it's more like binding your legs together and moving forward with a team of people, perhaps in a more lurching and halting fashion, but in a way that is actually going to have the entire team learn in a discovery manner. Collaboration is not a task-oriented endeavor. It is a discovery-learning endeavor that allows performance to come forward. Collaboration also, in Edison's lab, was an accelerator. It was a multiplier of outcomes and not just an additive function. So what I found in looking through Edison's notebooks, I spent 3 years working with experts at Rutgers at the Edison archives there. There's some 5 million pages of Edison's notebooks, his business correspondence, patent documents, court testimonies. We can literally track every minute of Edison's life and career from the time that he was about 16 until his death at the age of 84 in 1931. That's a lot of paper. But what we see is a very interesting focus on what collaboration was. And I invite you to look in your books on page 19, where I actually sort of flesh out what I believe Edison's definition of collaboration would be. Applying discovery learning within a context of complexity, inspired by a common goal or a shared purpose. So there's a lot of richness here. Discovery learning, I mentioned a moment ago, the notion of context, the notion of complexity, the notion of a shared purpose. So I felt it was important to actually explore these pieces. And what you'll find in Midnight Lunch is what I call the 4 phases of collaboration. And these 4 phases are integrated and connected. There are a number of charts in the book which may help you visualize this process. It's not a linear, sequential process. It's something that happens in real time, in simultaneous time, which is really how we're experiencing business life now, yes? Things are happening in complex ways, in real time, rapidly. So our ability to collaborate helps us be agile. It helps us move in more streamlined ways. Edison's organizations were flat. He did not have a pyramid structure in his labs or his manufacturing companies. He had 200 companies, both domestically and internationally. So you can go and look these up. This is really an extraordinary bit of Edison's success. But he liked people to actually contribute no matter their area of expertise or their tenure. So the very first phase of collaboration I describe as capacity. The ability to actually generate collaboration capacity. Phase 1 involves the formation of small teams. You think about your own work, your client work, what you do every day. Sometimes teams get large and ungainly. Edison's teams were 2 to 8 people. They were small and nimble. So the notion of being small is part of speed. Another part of forming capacity is to create a common currency, a set of common experiences that your employees will have. For Edison, this was Midnight Lunch. Midnight Lunch was the process of exploration and conversation in the laboratory when Edison would stay after work. He'd come back from dinner at 7 o'clock, check on his experiments, see who else was there, check on their experiments, and have them share their notebooks. If you were in sound, and you were in lighting, you were in electricity, and you were in motion sciences, you would share your insights and exchange notebooks. Edison would sort of look in, troubleshoot, make comments for 2 hours. You'd kick back at 9 o'clock, Edison would order in food, eat for an hour, sing songs, tell stories, smoke cigars, and then go back to work. So there was this notion of social connection as well as business connection, mixing social language and business language with no agenda. It wasn't like 9:05, food arrives. It was not like that. Don't even know what the topic of discussion is. But what ended up happening in these midnight lunch sessions, as they came to be called, was the transformation of employees into colleagues. This is the first phase of collaboration. When you work as colleagues, everything else accelerates. So phases 2, 3, and 4 are possible. They can exist. You can move through them. Yes, but it's harder if you're not in a collegial environment. So step 1 for you tomorrow, think about collegiality. Wow, what am I doing to have these small teams connect? What am I doing to create this fabric within the teams? Second phase of collaboration, context. I talked about Edison not really forming a context around the practice of voting. What does that really mean? Part of what Edison came to do was to begin his process with questions, not solutions. A lot of times we sit down in meetings and go, okay, we've got an hour, we've got to figure this out. What do you think? Anybody have any solutions? Now that's great if you have a task, a series of tasks that you have to complete. It's a linear process and you're troubleshooting to try to get to a result within a very short period of time. Absolutely great and can be very helpful and valuable to operate that way. But if you have a complex issue, if you have something that involves many stakeholders, if you have something that has a web of issues around it, you will want to think about the context of that challenge and begin with questions. What is it that we're trying to address? Can we align around the question that we're trying to solve? I know in business school, we really sort of started with a problem statement. Someone gave you a problem statement and you would try to address the problem statement. Well, what Edison would do was say, well, let's think about this statement and what is behind it. What's the backstory on that? Try to understand the context first. And what he found is that more robust solutions were yielded. So begin with questions. Don't begin with solutions. In the work I do with executives, I see tremendous speed of alignment around recognizing what the question you're all asking is and the agreement that that is the question. Then you can vector out and say, okay, how are we going to tackle this? What are the potential ways we can look at this challenge? Third phase of collaboration, coherence. How do teams stay together? What do we do so when obstacles show up, that the team just doesn't fall apart? How many of you think that $6.7 billion is a lot of money? Okay, most of you. A couple of you holding out for a little more. $6.7 billion is the estimated market value of the industries and patents established by Thomas Edison and his teams as of 1910. It was roughly 40 years of work. Any guesses as to what that figure would relate to today? 1910 dollars, 100, I'm sorry?
110.
Very close, about 100 billion. Using the most conservative deflator, so you could almost go up to 200 billion depending on which deflator you use, but very good. If we were to take all of the industries Edison created by the time of his death in 1931 and look at the successive industries and the successive inventions globally today, the value would exceed $1 trillion. So there's great value in creating coherence around teams, people who have passion, people who have drive to really solve something and roll up their sleeves. One of the most intriguing things that I found in my research, and there's more to phase 3 than I'm able to share just in these few minutes, but is a definition of progress. How would your teams define progress? Do you even attempt to define the progress of what your teams will yield? Not just in quantitative terms. Yes, we want to deliver X by such and such a time, but what are the other factors? Do we have speed of communication? Do we have a sense of collegiality? Are we able to synthesize information rapidly that's coming to us from outside? If we have different work styles, which is highly probable in a workforce that has 4 or 5 generations in it, what are the differences in how we communicate and how do we recognize that? So differences in your definition of progress can actually stop you right from the beginning, because you don't think that someone's working hard enough who comes in at noon, rides their bike, has their shirt tails hanging out. I might like to stay till 9 p.m. when you're not around. Boy, I don't know. It seems like a slacker to me. So what is the definition of progress in a team that might have a diverse base to it? And all of Edison's teams were diverse. Edison allowed people to work whenever they wanted, on the whole. Some people slept at the lab. They got there at 5, left at 3. There was all kinds of work hours. So progress is part of coherence. It's not something that we often connect. 4th phase of collaboration is complexity. You heard me reading the definition that this was a big part of how Edison viewed collaboration. Now, a lot of times when we organize today, we organize for efficiency. We organize to be fast. And often this gives us a task orientation right from the beginning. Edison organized for complexity. He recognized that it was going to be tough. He recognized that many skill sets were going to be required, so he didn't shy away from that. So baking in a view of complexity, the ability to handle high volumes of information, not only from your team going outward, but from the incoming perspective as well, is very important. Now, my colleagues and I will be talking about some of these items, some of these capacities, some of these qualities over the course of the evening. And I imagine that there are folks here from many different industries. So complexity can look different depending on whether you're in a service-based operation, if you're a technology-based company, and so on. So that's something that we can examine. But I urge you to think about collaboration differently than teamwork. I urge you to think about collaboration as a continuum, something that happens over time and is engaged in by a small team, passionately dedicated to a shared purpose that has some common sense of progress and a deep sense of collegiality. If we can view collaboration that way, we can start to connect to virtual activity, virtual networks, virtual teams, hybrid teams, live and virtual. Lots of combinations therein. So I look forward to a rich discussion. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to be with all of you today. I'll be staying afterward as well if you have any questions, and I welcome the opportunity to meet my colleagues as well in a deeper way over the course of the next hour or so. So thank you so much.